All right, so what happened to schools during Hurricane Katrina in 2005? The entire city is evacuated, and that means there are no students, right? So the schools are closed. And the schools, you can't just move kids back into a school that was recently flooded, so it requires some time before schools can reopen. When you see the map of the city, have you seen flood maps? They're really cool interactive flood maps of the city. Totally look them up. You can like watch the city flood and like see where was dry and where wasn't based on the flooding regions. But some areas of the city, including the West Bank, so the kids who live across the river, did not flood. And so relatively quickly, within a couple months after Katrina, those schools were able to reopen. But many of the school buildings, which are owned by the school district, are severely damaged, some of them, so you will basically never be able to have a school in them again and would need to tear them down and rebuild them. The other important thing is that entire neighborhoods are severely damaged. So when people move back, they don't necessarily move back to the neighborhood that they lived in before. A lot of times when people move back, they're moving into temporary housing. They're not sure where they're going to live, even from day to day. So the idea of the system of you move back, you register at the school that's closest to your house, that's your neighborhood school, it didn't really work. The other important thing is that, two important things to remember about how they did school reform here is that the schools were all closed. And so when we talk about other urban school districts attempting school reform, they usually don't have the luxury, and I'm not calling this a luxury in New Orleans, but if you wanted to replicate this, you can't just shut down all your schools for 6 months and regroup, right? That happened in New Orleans because of Hurricane Katrina. The other thing is that there were no kids that you needed to serve, right? So the buildings were closed, and there were no kids who needed services until people started to return. So, for example, people from Detroit are always asking us, like, how do we replicate this in Detroit? And we're like, we'll shut down your whole city for a year. Right? So you cannot just implement this the way it was implemented in New Orleans. You could kind of imitate some of the features, but it's not going to happen like this anywhere else. So market-based school reforms include a lot of different components, and the thing that's different about New Orleans is that many of them were implemented all at the same time. Part of this was by design. There were people in the city and people in the state who thought that this school district needed to be changed. A little about the context. We were like one of the lowest performing school districts in one of the lowest performing states in the country. So the students were not thriving here. There are some good schools, but there are a lot of schools that are highly underperforming. There's a really high dropout rate, really low completion rate. A lot of the buildings are in terrible condition. And the school district is very corrupt. So the story is that the Justice Department that investigates corruption within government agencies rented offices in the same building as our school district because they were constantly investigating things like bribery and fraud within our school districts. Right? So this was not a well-functioning bureaucratic system to begin with, and it was failing a lot of children. So some people in the state saw this as an opportunity to make radical change in the school district, and they planned for market-based school reform. This is what it included. The state had an agency called the Recovery School District that was created to take over underperforming schools. It already existed prior to Katrina, and this is something that's pretty common in U.S. states. So if a school is not performing well within its school district, the state takes it over, and the state kind of reconstitutes the school. It typically involves firing the principal, firing a lot of the teachers, kind of restaffing it, coming together and running a plan for school improvement. It can also include making it a charter school, but not necessarily. So this agency took over every school in New Orleans that was low performing prior to Katrina, which was something like 120 out of 128 schools. So nearly every public school in the city. Now, as students started to return, it was impossible to enforce neighborhood enrollment zones, partially because, you know, this neighborhood was inhabitable, but the school was over here, or this neighborhood was not inhabitable and it had a school. So as students returned, they said, okay, just enroll anywhere. And they told schools, don't worry about where students live. You can enroll any student who shows up and needs an education. So through that step, they eliminated nearly all the neighborhood attendance zones in the city, and that has not been reenacted, which gives parents school choice. They are able to enroll in schools outside their neighborhood without any permission, as long as it's an open enrollment school. The buildings were closed, and the school district ran out of money. So initially the school district was paying their teachers, and these teachers were under a union contract with the school district. Eventually they didn't have any money anymore. The state wasn't giving their per pupil money because they weren't teaching pupils, and all the teachers were dismissed. On the same day, every employee of the school district was fired, basically. And that included, janitors all the way up to school principals. Again, this is something that probably can't happen anywhere else, and it only happened because the school district ran out of money. Now, people think this was part of the plan. It wasn't really part of the plan. It happened because they ran out of money. But when you're doing school reform, it's pretty convenient if you get to decide who to rehire because you fired all the teachers. Right? So many of these teachers, about half of them were rehired within the next couple of years. Many of them just retired. So I'll go into that a little more later. The RSC, the Recovery School District Strategy, was to transition the schools that it took over to charter management. So over the course of the next 8 years, all the schools that the RSC took over were either closed or given to charters. Some other schools that were under OPSC's control, the local school district's control, chose to go become charter schools. And it was kind of cool the way this happened sometimes. So a bunch of teachers came back to a school in Algiers, which is on the other side of the river and didn't flood. And the school building's there, and they're like, okay, we're just taking over. So a group of teachers said, we're going to make the school better. We're going to run the school, and the school district eventually transitioned to like, okay, let's figure out a contract so that's actually a real thing. And so some charter schools in New Orleans were really kind of homegrown that way. Other charter schools came from the state contracting out of school. So the way that people in New Orleans feel about charter schools is very different, depending on which charter school you're talking about. In other cities, you'll feel people who are like, charter schools are a good idea, they're a bad idea. Here we have so many different models, it's hard to say. The other thing that came with it was increased test-based accountability and financial oversight through charter contracts. So the people who were doing the reform were like, we're not going to have a corrupt system anymore. We're going to pay a lot of attention to student performance. We're going to measure student performance growth very well. We're going to be really transparent about financials, which had not been happening in the school district before. So all of this happens together. So I don't know which ones work and which ones don't. That's part of the objective of our work, because they did them all at the same time. So as scientists, when you talk to a school district and they're doing reform, you say change one thing and control all the rest of it, right? We had no control over anything here. So even the student population changed because some students were evacuated and never moved back, and some students came back. So it's really fun to study.
One question, if I may interrupt. The records, did the hurricane also damage all the records?
There are people who don't have birth certificates. So yeah, schools lost a lot of records. I mean, school records were already digital. So like I have data from students going back to 1999 and their test scores and their student ID numbers and stuff like that. But whether when they returned they maintained the same student ID number, like, is unclear. It appears that for 2 years, none of the teachers who worked for the Recovery School District were paid. I know they were, but they didn't go in the system. So yeah, a lot of stuff was lost. I mean, I think some of the third grade standardized test score is probably the least important of what might have been lost in the system. But yeah. A lot of times when we ask for things, they're like, it was in the basement. And it was
so is there now arrangements in New Orleans for backup systems in case of another hurricane coming through, that the data collection centers and so on are backed up elsewhere?
It is not a priority. Everything now is decentralized. So you would have to ask 44 charter management organizations what they do to back up their data. The state, again, maintains the data system, but often in New Orleans, we're still told it's still paper records. Like, when I bought my house, they're like, you better keep copies of everything because it's still paper records. That I might not be able to prove I own my house after another hurricane. So that's like a larger question for city managers. I have not heard it be a concern in the public schools. So I think probably charter schools think about it, but they worry about other things. The one thing we got a lot of money for was buildings. So the federal government paid a lot of money to rebuild the school buildings. I don't think we got a lot of money to pay for data systems. So part of it is correct by that. So this is what it looks like now compared to before. So we still have these selected admissions charter schools that are operated directly under the State Board of Education. The local school district got to keep its high-performing neighborhood schools, but many of them opted to become either selected admission or open enrollment charter schools. So right now, the Orleans Parish School District operates, I think, 6 enroll. Then there's a bunch of charter schools under OPSB, about 10 of them. Most of them are selective admissions. One of them tests 4-year-olds for admissions in kindergarten. Not the biggest fan of that. Most of the schools, though, were transitioned to governance by the Louisiana Recovery School District. The Louisiana Recovery School District is, their boss is the FASB, not the OPSB. Though they took over all the low-performing neighborhood schools and transitioned them either to open enrollment charter schools, there are no selective admissions charter schools in the United States, or they were permanently closed. Many of them were closed because the population of the city fell significantly. And so we're left with about 90 of these charter schools right now. So the important thing from a local political perspective, if any of you are interested in political economy, is as New Orleans voters, we only vote for these people. These people are governed by a state level board, right? So in the city, voters feel as if they have lost control of their own school district because the majority of schools are not governed by our local school district currently. So in a typical city, you will see some charter schools. Like you might have 100 public schools and 10 or 15 charter schools in a city like Houston or Dallas, right? DC is a little bit higher, that they're at about like 40% of their kids go to charter schools. In New Orleans, over 90% of our kids go to charter schools. And most of those charter schools are governed at the state level and not the local level. Another important difference there is that OPSB is required by law to have open public meetings because they are an elected local government body. The charter schools themselves, it's actually really common in the U.S. just to go to a school board meeting and like voice your complaints, right? There's like lines of parents and students and residents who speak at school board meetings, you know, and they're like, you need to have more money for blah, 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 or the buses are, you know, creating traffic in my neighborhood, or my kid's not getting a good education. That's really typical. And that was typical in New Orleans as well, but we had this kind of corrupt process there. The charter schools have boards as nonprofit organizations, but they don't have to have public meetings. And their membership is a little blurrier. They're not elected, they're appointed boards. So how a community member would speak to the governance of a school in New Orleans is less transparent than it is when it's under an elected school board. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Have there been talks of closing down the recovery school district? And I imagine that there is a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so just this year, in fact just this month, they passed a bill that will return all of these schools to OPSB by 2019. So what the law said, the state takes over the schools and it's supposed to be temporary, and as their performance improves, our schools get a letter grade. So like an A is the best you can do, and a B and a C. So as soon as they're a C school, they can vote to return here. Only I think 2 had voted to return. They actually kind of liked the rules better over here than the rules they would face over there. The legislature at the state level passed a law that all of them will be moved back to OPSB, whether they're C schools or not, by 2019. So we're doing a process called unification, and they're going to have parties. Because it's New Orleans, so we're having unification parties starting in fall. And hopefully a very friendly process of returning all of these schools back to OPSB governance. But the idea is that it is not appropriate for the state to control local schools, but those should be controlled at the local level. Yeah?
So is there a movement to regain some sort of local input to the charter schools through their boards and so on?
They have kind of rewritten rules for board composition, and they are trying to write rules for open records of boards. It's a very fuzzy legal area whether nonprofit boards need to have public meetings or not because of their status. OPSB will be a single board meeting where people can go, but if you wanted to speak in general to the boards of charter organizations, you would have to go to 50